Alright, it's time to take a look at the Hunter cards. Let's just get straight into it. This is one of my favorite cards in the set. This is the Wolpertinger. It's a 1-mana common beast. It's a 1/1 with a battle cry that summons a copy of it. So it's essentially a better version of Alley Cat. And Alley Cat was a cool card, but this is, I would argue, is better than Alley Cat because look how cute it is. This thing is so adorable. It has gigantic, horrible teeth and like wings and antlers and like a big fluffy rabbit tail. I love this thing. It's so good. It's great with current builds of Hunter if you want to run like a... if you run Scavenger's Ingenuity, it can turn this into a 1-mana 3/3 that summons a copy of it that's a 3/3. So there's that. It's just a 1-mana 1/1 beast. And if we know anything about Hunter cards, it's like 1-mana 1/1 beasts typically always see some amount of play. Maybe Beast Hunter will finally be a thing because of things like Wolpertinger. This works really well in comparison with Shando Wildclaw, because Shando will buff these to be 2/2s, and when you play it, it'll summon 2/2/2s. It's quite good there.
Yeah, but Wolpertinger, to the surprise of basically nobody, saw players because it was a 1-mana 1/1 beast in Hunter with decent beast synergy, and is often good enough just played on its own without any extra support. Getting 2 1/1s early in the game is really good, and sometimes overwhelmed your opponent because they didn't want to burn removal on this sort of stuff. And 2 damage from one card over multiple turns, 2 damage a turn over multiple turns if they're not wasting removal on this, ended up being really, really important. Great target off of Scavenger's Ingenuity, as I called, but yeah, saw a ton of play basically as a decent early game minion in most face Hunter decks and even some Highlander lists.
Next up is Carrion Studies. It is a 1-mana common spell. Discover a Death Rattle minion. Your next one costs 1 less. I think that maybe this will be good. There are some decent Death Rattle cards in the set right now. There's things like a Serpent Egg, and there's a Snake in this set that is a great Death Rattle effect. And making them cheaper is always really good. I think it's fine.
Carrion Studies is not that bad of a studies at all, actually. Just kind of hurts a little with sometimes you would use this and you just wouldn't get benefit out of it. It's not a bad card. It doesn't see too much play. I think it's a flex spot in some Hunter decks and more experimental off-meta lists. Doesn't see play in any Face Hunter or Highlander Hunter right now. There are some really good targets you can get off of this, so it's not a terrible card by any means. And I think likely to see a lot more play in the future with a lot of new Death Rattle cards being printed, especially over the next standard rotation. When Hunter loses like its Highlander package and some of its more aggressive face Hunter style cards, it might see some play as more of like a Death Rattle mid-range build with beasts, with Shando potentially. But that didn't come together in Scholomance. Face Hunter was just more efficient without Carrion Studies and a Death Rattle package.
Next is Overwhelm. It's a 1-mana rare spell. Deal 2 damage to a minion and deal 1 more damage for each beast you control. So again, fits right into that beast archetype. It gives you some board control in that deck. It also notably is a 1-mana spell, which will matter for Professor Slate, the Hunter legendary from the set. Yeah, Overwhelm is quite good. I really do think that the upside of this is going to be relevant sometimes. And again, beast builds typically require board presence and are usually obviously minion based decks. So having an efficient removal spell that gets better with the more beasts you have is quite powerful. Again, it fits right in with cards like Professor Slate, which we'll look at later. But maybe this doesn't see play alongside that just because it's a cheap removal spell. Maybe this will see play in Beast Druid. I don't think it will slot into current versions of Highlander Hunter. Because it's kind of niche, and 1-mana deal 2, you already have Arcane Shot, which can go face, so that's relevant. Again, maybe it'll see play in some kind of beast deck.
Overwhelm saw basically next to no play whatsoever, even though plenty of beasts were being played in Face Hunter and in Highlander Hunter. The important, I guess, part of it is you don't want to be drawing this card, you want to be drawing Reach, and Overwhelm does not go face. It also wasn't any good with Slate because Slate wasn't any good. Slate saw no play, Overwhelm saw no play, and they didn't really work together. It wasn't worth putting 2 bad cards in your deck to make either of them good. Overwhelm, I think, doesn't really have much of a chance to see play, even in like a mid-range Death Rattle Beast build. It's efficient if you have beasts on the board, and Hunter does run a lot of beasts, but I don't think it's the kind of card that will see any play. I accurately also predicted that it wouldn't see play in Highlander Hunter, and it didn't. Highlander Hunter moved away from value and removal-based cards, and basically just ran a really efficient... They were basically just a face deck with no duplicates, and they ran Zephyrus just to like give them Fireball for reach, or Wind Furies, or Bloodlusts with wide boards. They didn't even run Alex Strauzer, like Bran as a top end, which you would Polk Cult to 2 to 4, etc., etc.
Next up, we have Krolosk Bark Stripper. It's a 4-mana epic minion. It's a 3/5, and it's a beast. It has Spellburst, destroy a random enemy minion. Again, some of the Spellburst cards are great because they allow us to look at spells that we already have in the DM and think, right, do I run spells in my deck now to activate these Spellburst cards because the effects are quite good. This is a really great Spellburst effect, but I don't think this will actually see play in Highlander Hunter or current Hunter builds running a few spells, because you have better options in those decks. You have Deadly Shot for starters, which is 1 mana less than this. Sure, you don't get a 3/5, but you have to play a spell alongside this anyway. It's notably much, much worse than Rotnest Drake. Rotnest Drake is a much better stat line, and is only 1 mana more, and the condition for Rotnest Drake, I would argue, is much easier to pull off than this. But this is still fine. If you're desperate for removals in a beast deck, removal in a beast deck, you're fine. But I think you probably just run not Kill Command. You probably would just run Kill Command over this. Kill Command or Deadly Shot, I think, is probably better than this. A 3/5 beast, even though it's only 1 mana for the 3/5, you do have to still play a spell. So this probably is at minimum 5 mana, because I don't think Hunter has any 0 mana spells.
Basically right on the money there. What I didn't foresee is that neither Deadly Shot nor Rotnest Drake really saw that much play as Highlander Hunter evolved into be more of a face deck and stopped running a lot of dragons. I think some of them do still run Rotnest Drake as just a way to clear taunts. But yeah, they've cut a lot of dragons from their package in Highlander Hunter, and they only run Rotnest Drake sometimes, but some of them don't run dragons at all. And they just run like a more efficient face-based cards. Again, they really knuckled down and became a face deck, curve topping at Bran. And I basically, is it just worse than a lot of other cards that Hunter already had access to? Just not a niche that you wanted. It just, the face of the card just wasn't good enough. If it was potentially a better minion at a baseline, it probably would have seen way more play. Rotnest Drake, for example, is extremely aggressively statted and is much easier to use. Like, holding a dragon is an easier condition to get a kill command effect than casting a spell, even if you do have spells you want to be casting. Also accurate to point out that kill command is probably just better in Face Hunter.
Next up is the Teacher's Pet. Again, we've talked about this a bit in Druid. I do think that it actually might be better in Hunter because of more of a Death Rattle theme in Hunter. Again, you have the Carrion Studies. You could run this with Terran Gorefiend. You have other ways to, get... I mean, a random 3-cost beast is great in Hunter. You have things like Zigsaw available to you by default in Hunter, alongside this. I do think Teacher's Pet is a good fit for a Beast Hunter deck because they would need that sort of taunt support. This also might see play in Highlander Hunter as just like a nice sort of defensive minion. I think notable about Teacher's Pet, though, in both Druid and Hunter, is that the 3-cost beasts are going to be a lot worse than they are typically in Druid, especially with things like Mount Seller, because this is going to usually be killed by your opponent, and you're not going to be killing this off. There's a lot of rush beasts at 3 mana, and you will not be getting that rush effect if your opponent is killing this minion for you on their turn. You're not going to be able to rush in on their turn with the minion that comes out of this necessarily.
So the thing that made Teacher's Pet playable in Druid was Guardian Animals. And I tunnel visioned so much on the Death Rattle aspect of the card, I didn't even really put together that it was just a 5-mana beast, and Druid wanted good 5-mana beasts. Since Guardian Animals saw no play in Hunter, Teacher's Pet saw no play in Hunter. They just didn't need the taunt. They again, as I've stated many times, they built much more towards either Face or Highlander, and the Highlander lists were basically just more Face decks.
Next is a Bloated Python. It's a 3-mana rare minion. That's a 1/2 beast with a death rattle that summons a 4/4 hapless handler. So this is an egg that can attack, essentially. It's a big snake. Again, it fits right into this death rattle beast build I sort of have in my head, but I don't really know if that will pick up. We'll see. This does fit in quite nicely in Highlander Hunter, actually, alongside things like Pack Tactics and other great cards. It's good stats. And I mean, it sort of demands removal. It's not a bad card. It might slot into that deck. It might not. It might get cut later. It's a great fit for those Death Rattle Beast builds that we were talking about, alongside eggs and things like Terran Gorefiend and whatnot. Maybe that will come together. Maybe not this expansion, but I do think this is. I like this card. It's quite strong, and again, it's an egg that can attack. It demands quite a bit of respect, and I kind of like it about that. I kind of like that about this card.
Bloated Python is a really great card. It's just not a great fit for the way Hunter was being built, competitively speaking. But a card I think that will potentially see some impact maybe after rotation. I don't know if Death Rattle Hunter is going to get there this expansion. They might. They did get some Death Rattle support. But over Scholomance, the card just didn't see play. It didn't go face. It wasn't super aggressively statted. So it didn't see any play, even though it was great with Pack Tactics, for example, which is a secret that does see play, even in Face Hunter. But I guess it's better to get, like, the targets that they wanted for Pack Tactics were good enough. You had the 1/3 that make your hero power, that let your hero power target minions. You had Phase Stalkers, even Warpatingers and Intrepid Initiates were better targets for Pack Tactics in Face Hunter than an egg that can attack.
Again, Blood Herald, we talked about this for Demon Hunter. It is so much worse in Hunter than it is in Demon Hunter because you don't have as much token synergy in this deck. Again, there are a lot of death rattles that will spawn minions like Teacher's Pet, like the snake we just saw, which does sort of make this a lot better. But again, the problem still persists of, yeah, you can make this really big, but it can easily be removed. It also doesn't have a beast tag, so it doesn't benefit from potential beast synergies in Hunter. And there's a fair bit of weakness to that in my mind. I really don't see this card seeing any play whatsoever.
So I want to admit here that I'm actually technically wrong about Blood Herald in that it is worse in Hunter by a lot than Demon Hunter. Both classes actually have a lot of token synergy right now, as Quest Hunter does run a lot of token generators and token generating, like just a lot of token generators, and cards that summon minions, because that's part of their quest. But even with that caveat in mind, Blood Herald is a garbage card and has seen no play. Probably the worst card in the entire set. I have been killed by it though, to be honest. I have. But it is definitely the worst card in Scholomance Academy.
It's just terrible.
Yeah.
And Demon Companion, again, as I said, it's probably going to be the same in Hunter as it is in Demon Hunter. This does notably fit quite well in Highlander Hunter decks. Because, I mean, Animal Companion does get run in Highlander Hunter, and this is just a slightly smaller version for a slightly cheaper mana, which I quite like, actually. It might see play in other Hunter decks as well, if they are just desperate for one-drop cards, but they already have a pretty great one-drop in the form of the 1/3 that can target minions. But yeah, Demon Companion, fine in Hunter. I think better in Demon Hunter, but again, it'll probably slot into Highlander Hunter, maybe. Maybe it'll get cut later for more powerful effects, or it'll be a decent substitution.
So Demon Companion actually saw a ton of play in Hunter as a card in Face Hunter. Dealing 2 damage on turn 1 is really good, pairs really well with your Intrepid Initiate, and even the Leok wasn't too bad some of the time because you did get wide boards, because you had things like Warpatingers to fill the board. And Snake Traps sometimes, not often, like very, very rarely. Demon Companion, I think, a card that will continue to see a lot of play in aggressive Hunter decks. And surprisingly did not see that much play in Demon Hunter because of Soulshot Demon Hunter. It does see play in odd Demon Hunter and Wild though, but I'm not talking about Demon Hunter, we're talking about Hunter. Yeah, did see a lot of play in Face Hunter and Highlander Hunter because they just needed efficient face damage cards, and Demon Companion, pretty much with all modes, was efficient enough at dealing damage and being annoying that it saw a bunch of play in Hunter.
True Aim Crescent, again, 1 mana, epic weapon, 1/4. I think the benefits of this card are probably a little worse in Hunter because you don't have the 1 mana hero power that lets you sort of make your attack better. It does still allow you to go face and also trade, which will be valuable. I don't think Highlander Hunter really needs the help right now. I think they've got enough ways to do it. This also competes with your Stormhammer, which is definitely better than this in Hunter. I don't think I see this one. Hunters want weapons with much more attack. The only real exception to this was Candle Shot in the Kobolds and Catacombs meta, but Candle Shot was so good because it could pair with things like Hunter's Mark to basically just be completely free removal. And on top of that, Candle Shot also made you immune when attacking, so you could kill any X1s you wanted, which was really quite nice.
Triumph Crescent is a sometimes card in some Highlander Hunter lists, but I think was cut eventually as part of the greater push towards, more refined face damage and aggro. It sometimes does see play in those lists, but is definitely one of the weaker cards in the 30.
Guardian Animals is back for Hunter. It's 7 mana epic spell, and again, I think the same thing for Hunter applies to Druid. The deck building limitations you would have to do for this just hurt you, and I think that Hunter is going to move more towards a Death Rattle Beast package rather than a bigger Beast package, especially since the only real 5 mana beasts they have access to are things like the Teacher's Pet and maybe Zigzaw. And Zigzaw's a 3 mana 2/4, so I don't think you want to be recruiting that for 7 mana. This is just a really high cost card for the effect that it gives you, and that really sort of hurts its playability, I think. Again, recruit effects are really strong, but this has a limitation on it in the fact that it's only pulling beasts and it's only ones that cost 5 or less. So it doesn't even go into potential recruit hunters in wild because their beasts they run a roll really gigantic. Again, in Hunter, Katharina is probably better than this for wild play.
So Guardian Animals suffers from the same problem as all high cost Hunter cards are, in that you don't live long enough to use them. And this does require awkward deck building, and you don't have access to ramp and good 5-cost beasts, really. You also are running Zigzaw in pretty much every single Hunter deck, and that also messes with Guardian Animals because you don't want to be recruiting a 3-mana 2/4 with Rush. Guardian Animals definitely didn't get there for Hunter in this expansion, and has since been nerfed for its sins in Druid. Will I think it will see play going forward? Potentially. There is more 5-cost beasts being added to Hunter that might make Guardian Animals a lot more interesting of a card. But honestly, I think Guardian Animals is built for Druid and will pretty much be exclusively used as a Druid card and not a Hunter card.
Next is Professor Slate. It's a 3 mana legendary minion. It's a 3/4 and your spells are poisonous. This is ballistic. Like, this is a spider tank with an insane amount of upside. Hi, Carly. Any damage spell you play in Hunter becomes removal, and Hunter has already access to a lot of really cheap removal. You have things like Overwhelm, we've already seen. You have we have Rapid Fire, which is a 1 mana spell. So at 5 mana with Twin Spell. So it's 5 mana, you play Professor Slate, you can kill 2 things for 1 mana each. That's really, really efficient. Your opponent also has to desperately respect this if you're running secrets, because if this is on the board, then they have to kill it first in case they have Explosive Trap, because Explosive Trap will just wipe their board completely. I'm kind of glad Hunter doesn't have access to board clears, even cheap ones, because this would just absolutely break the game in that sense. This is a really dangerous card to print. The thing is, it does kind of go against a lot of what Hunter wants to do, right? Hunter wants to use its spells to go face. Hunter wants to be aggressive. Hunter doesn't like playing from behind, and this is really good if you're playing from behind because it's efficient and it helps you kill other minions. But you don't need to kill minions in Hunter. You want to kill your opponent, not your opponent's minions. And this doesn't really help you go face and kill them. If a control Hunter deck does sort of spring up somehow, this will be an auto include in that list. And in fact, I kind of like it in the Recruit Hunter I was just talking about, because you can use it to clear boards. It's not a beast, so you can run it without worrying about messing up your Katharina. And it allows you to keep aggro at bay. You can run things like Vicious Bite in Wild, which will just turn this into a 5 mana clear 3 minions for absolutely nothing, which is really, really nuts. It does conflict a lot with Hunter ideas. but I still think that Professor Slate is quite good. And maybe we'll see play in Highlander Hunter and they move more towards some spell packages. But who knows? Highlander Hunter is tier 1 right now, and maybe they don't need to change too much about their deck. And Professor Slate isn't the kind of thing they need right now.
Professor Slate is another perfect example of a hunter card that would be broken in almost any other class, but because it is a hunter card, it sees next to no play whatsoever. Was experimented with alongside Kel'Thuzad in some crazy mid-range hunter lists that basically people just wanting to experiment with some control stuff. But Hunter not only doesn't have the spells to make this work, it really just doesn't fit their game plan. You don't want to be playing, the removal game as Hunter. You want to be efficiently killing your opponent, even if you aren't a face deck. Hunter has always been about mid-range and efficient minions and taking board control and presenting inevitable lethal with your hero power. And Professor Slate doesn't really let you get there at all. I think this was an interesting design space for Hunter, and I think one maybe to watch out for, come rotation. But as it stands, Professor Slate saw next to no play at all in Scholomance Academy, and for good reason, essentially. Making your spells poisonous, in Hunter, at least, is not that great of an effect.
Adorable Infestation again. I think the problems that I had with it in Druid stay with Hunter. This is not a turn 1 play. Admittedly, this is really good in Hunter though, because you can buff your 1 mana 1/3 that targets minions with your hero power. It makes that a lot more resilient and harder to remove, and it gives you a 1/1 to help you contest the board. It might be good in like mid-range Hunter lists. Maybe this goes in Dragon Hunter because it's not beast specific buffs. You can put this anywhere, which is kind of nice. But it is kind of a minor effect. Even though you do get a lot out of this, it's still really minor. And you can't play it on turn 1, which is when it would be the best. I think this is a good turn 2 play still though, so who knows.
Adorable Infestation was actually good enough to see use in Highlander Hunter. Its efficiency and generating a 1/1, giving you a 1/1 in your hand, and giving you a +1/+1 was a lot of what face decks wanted to actually do. It's great with Intrepid Initiates. It is really good with the 1/3 that lets your hero power target minions. And it's one of those tools that helps you go wide with Face Hunter, which is something you were actually wanting to do quite a lot. Durable Infestation actually saw a ton of play in Standard in Hunter and saw a lot of wild play in Druid. Probably one of the more underrated cards of the set for me. Giving a minion +1/+1 and summoning a 1/1 for 1 mana is actually not something to underrate, I think.
I think it's much better in Druid than in Hunter though. Even though Hunter has a 1 mana 1/3 that makes it stickier and harder to remove, maybe you just want a hero power on 2 instead, or play things like your Face Stalker or whatnot. You maybe just don't want to play 3/3 worth of stats on turn 2. Next is Ace Hunter Creed again. I still think this is great in Hunter, because again, this has to be respected. You either have to remove this immediately, you have to respect it, you have to remove it immediately. If at any point your opponent has a board, you probably get blown out by a huge tempo swing because they can just remove all your minions for free. This sort of does what Professor Slate does in a sense, but in a way that is much better for Hunter, even around the same time. This means that you have to remove Hunter minions at all costs now, because if at any point they play Ace Hunter Kreen and you have minions, you probably lose those minions, and then you probably never come back from that, right? Like, if there's a situation where if your opponent plays Ace Hunter Kreen against you, you probably will never stick a minion for the rest of the game unless you kill Kreen and then kill the rest of their minions. Combat is going to be a nightmare for you with this card. Again, it is weak to removal, but so is everything. It does have 4 health, notably, by turn 3, which is quite nice, and is a lot harder to remove with things like Breath of the Infinite and, Consecration, which is what I would consider to be early game removal. This still is great on turn 3, it's very hard to remove.
So I think the key point that I made in my past review that probably should have eluded me to what Kreen would actually be doing is that it is a similar effect to Professor Slate. The tempo swing of keeping your minions alive when trading doesn't really matter when you want to be going face and killing your opponent instead, especially when sometimes you're running things like Rottnest Drake, and even Freezing Trap was used basically to keep you in the game and so you didn't have to trade, which unfortunately made Ace Hunter Kreen not that great in Hunter.
Even in Hunter, it's good. I think it is better in Demon Hunter, but it's still really good in regular Hunter. Shando Wildclaw 2, last card here. I think this will actually be okay in Highlander Hunter now and then. I think people will run it if they want to be greedy and copy the King Crush you get for Brand for 10 mana, because that's 16 damage with charge. But this is a lot weaker in Highlander Hunter and in Hunter in general because of giving Beast in your deck +1/+1. I don't think will come up as much, because if you are running a Hunter Beast deck, I do think you run more of the Death Rattle package. So you are running things like Eggs, which aren't beasts. You're running Terran Gorfield, which isn't a beast. And you're probably running other supplemental, just good Hunter cards, like the 1 mana 1/3 that can target hero power. They can use your hero power to target minions, and other things like that. I really do think this might see some experimentation in Highlander Hunter with some other beasts, if you want to be really greedy and copy things like King Crush. But that's the only way I see it in Hunter. I think this is much more of a Druid card. Alright.
So, Shando Wildclaw did see some experimentation in Highlander Hunter in the early Scholomance meta, but was quickly dismissed as they weren't running enough good beasts, and slowly refined their deck down to a more efficient face deck with, again, Polkelt, Brand on the top of the curve, Dragon, Bane, etc, etc. That's the Hunter cards. Next is Mage. Okay, let's go. Trick Totem, we're on Mage. Okay, quick note before we get into the reviews more broadly. Mage at the time of these reveals was the worst it had been in months. So a lot of these cards are not rated with any Mage deck in mind. Like Tempo Mage didn't exist, right? There was no build of Tempo Mage that was doing any well at all. The only Mage deck that really was seeing any use was Highlander Mage, and it was trash. It had gotten nerfed into the ground and was seeing no play whatsoever. So let's go.
Trick Totem. It's a 2 mana 0/3. It's a rare. It's a totem. And at the end of your turn, you cast a random spell that costs 3 or less. This is really great in Mage. Mage secrets are all 3 mana, and this doing a random secret is still good value. This also, it does have to be removed. Again, it has to be something respected. It's got as like a soft taunt. You can't leave this on the board. This could really be problematic for you as a Mage, because you could hit some things that do end up being negligent for you, negligible for you, or negative for you.
No
because,
shit.
It can target your face or your own minions. But being able to cast secrets, which is most 3 mana Mage spells, is quite good. Arcane Intellect as well, also a 3 mana Mage spell, which isn't too detrimental if it casts from this, unless you overdraw from it. But I mean, you're probably playing this on turn 2, and you probably have the hand space for it. Maybe it'll be tried in Highlander Mage, but I don't know if it'll stick there. If it's just consistent enough to constantly see play, and the effect is just always a net positive, or is positive often enough to be good, then it probably will see play in Secret Mage, in Highlander Mage quite a bit. But that's it. In Wild, nah, there's no way. Current Mage builds in Wild are so overtuned with the quests, with secrets, with Reno, that there's no way this sees play there.
Yeah, so basically right on the money on Wild, of course. Trick Totem, by the way, one of the worst cards in the set. Absolute ridiculous. I didn't even realize at the time that it could cast any spell from any class. I thought that it could only cast class-based spells. But Trick Totem in Mage didn't even see any look whatsoever, because it was quickly discovered to be absolute trash. The card was completely terrible. It turns out that casting random spells with random targets, even if they're 3 or less, is not actually value. And Trick Totem ended up doing nothing positive for you most of the time in Mage.
Next is Cram Session. It's a 2 mana spell. It's a rare. Draw 1 card. Improved by spell damage. You only need spell damage +1 to make this better than Arcane Intellect, and that feels pretty good, especially considering that there's fairly cheap spell damage in the set. Mage, I think spell damage is the deck that I've built, I've theory crafted, and I'm looking forward to trying out. I don't think it'll be tier 1 or anything. I think it'll be fun. But there's a lot of really cool cards for the spell damage build, and this is one of them. This is just, there's no reason not to run this if you're running a spell damage build, which seems to be kind of pushed for Mage right now. And yeah, hitting spell damage +1 makes this card good. Spell damage +2 makes it like really good. It's just better than Arcane Intellect in that point. And if you really needed it to, it can even probably go up to like draw 6 cards, but that's kind of nuts. And if you've got 5 spell damage on the board, like a Malygos tier amount of spell damage, why aren't you just winning the game with spells? Why are you trying to draw cards? But also, this could help you refill, right? So there's that aspect as well. I don't think you run Malygos in the spell damage major deck. It's just too slow. I think you want to run it more as a tempo-y deck, and this helps that tempo package a lot because it helps you draw cards to it keeps you refill in matchups.
So funnily enough, Cram Session ended up being probably, if we were doing a star rating system 1 to 5, Cram Session absolutely 5-star card. Basically one of the better cards in the tempo mage builds, even on turn 2, if you had Lab Partner into Cram Session or you had Solarian into Cram Session. Cram Session was like an essential draw card in those decks. And it's funny to hear me mention, like, why would you want to draw 6 cards with this? That's exactly what it was used for in Mozaki Mage. 1 copy of Cram Session allowed you to draw the rest of your deck and OTK your opponent with the rest of the spells that you had in there. So yeah, definitely a 5-star card if we were giving star ratings here. Cram Session, definitely one of the best mage cards in the set, if not probably the best mage card in the set, actually. There was a lot of great mage stuff. The spell damage mage, by the way, that I refer to as we continue going through these cards, is essentially the build of tempo mage that was made. Not quite, obviously. My build was unrefined and missing some stuff. I think I even had Mozaki in it. I don't remember. I'd have to go and have a look, but for sure, like, tempo mage ended up being one of the best decks of the meta and was obliterated by the most recent rounds of nerfs because of how strong it was.
Next we have Firebrand. It's a 3-mana 3/4 with a spell burst that deals 4 damage randomly split among all enemy minions. This is essentially a Flame Waker with a much higher ceiling and a really a much higher floor, I should say, and a much lower ceiling. I think it won't see play. 3-mana 3/4 is a really good stat line, but the thing about Flame Waker that made it so good was that it infinitely scaled with every spell you played, whereas this only scales off of the first one. It's a lot better in the short term, but in the long term, it's just not even close. You would much rather run Flame Waker, and because of that comparison, I feel like you don't run this card in any major deck right now. It just takes a lot of work to get there, and it's just not scary enough. The thing about Flame Waker was you definitely had to respect it because at any point you could just play it, and you could play it at any time in the game and it'd be ballistic. This is a lot worse in the late game. It does still require a spell to activate it, and it's only 1 spell to get the effect, whereas Flame Waker is every spell you play deals damage, and that makes it so much better. And I think the comparison to Flame Waker is just what kills this card for me.
Firebrand, surprisingly was actually decent. I think it saw a 1-off in some tempo mage lists. Not all of them ran it, and not all of them ran 2. Definitely none. I don't think any of them ran 2. But it was actually really efficient at controlling small boards because small minions were important, especially like, against Paladin in particular. You wanted to be killing small minions if you could. Like turn 3, if you could play this with the coin, with something else, ended up being really helpful. It wasn't like an essential card in those lists, but it did see play, and I think even Highlander Mage ended up running a copy of Firebrand because they just needed the early board control. I don't know though, because Imprisoned Observer was also running Highlander Mage, and I think maybe that would have just been better. But anyway, Firebrand is actually not bad.
Next is Wormweaver. It's a 5-mana rare minion. It's a 3/6 with Spell Burst that summons 2 1/3 mana worms. Notable with this card is that the spell burst will trigger and then the mana worms will be summoned, so the mana worms will summon as 1/3s and not 2/3s.
Important distinction.
Because the spell has to resolve for the spell burst to trigger. How good is this? Well, on turn 6 it's quite good, but you still have to play a 1-mana spell to combo with it, and then again the later in the game it gets, the worse this is, the easier it also is to activate. If you can stick both the mana worms and then you just have a nuts turn where you play a ton of spells after it, you probably win the game. But if you're activating this right away, which you probably should so you get it online, the mana worms become easy to remove, and she's just a 3/6. At a baseline, she is quite good. She's a 5-mana, 5/12, which is a lot of stats for 5 mana, but you have to activate the spell burst to do that, so she'll be at least 6 mana unless you have a coin. Which you might do, but I don't see her being played in mage builds right now. She's just a bit too slow, and the stats and the wide body just don't end up mattering too much.
This is kind of a shocking thing to me. Wormweaver, definitely a garbage card, so absolutely no play, shockingly, during this meta, but I think Like, on paper, as powerful as this card seems, think people were doing way more busted stuff for 5 to 6 mana. Like, 5-6 mana is like a golden turn for Guardian Animals Druid, who was summoning, you know, multiple beasts from their deck at that point, and mana worms just don't compete, and they were easy to remove. Druids were picking up the Lake Thresher, which would cleave through them super easily, and it was so hard to get them to stick and get them to buff in the same turn. It's just not a lot worked out for Wormweaver. The meta was just too quick. In a slower metagame, this would be insane, but maybe not, because there's also a lot of clears that can deal with mana worms. But on paper, this card seems insane. It just nothing lined up for it to actually see any play.
Next is Primordial Studies. It's a 1 mana common spell. Discover a spell damage minion, and your next one costs 1 less. So yeah, it's just a perfect fit in the spell damage deck. This is just a great way to give you more spell damage minions. Most spell damage minions are pretty good. There isn't too many of them, so the pool is quite small. You'll be hitting things like Thalnoses or the new Mage 1 mana 1/3 quite often, which is what you want. If you hit that
really
1 mana 1/3,
wrong.
you'll be able to activate things like your Cram Sessions and other cards. You'll be able to activate quite easily. Because you can just have cheap spell damage minions, because this will just make your cheaper ones even cheaper. Like, this would make Thalnos 1 mana, for example, which is still good. Like, imagine paying 1 mana for Thalnos.
Primordial Studies, I said earlier in the previous review that I thought that Nature Studies was the best of the studies. And at the time, that was probably true. And probably for the early meta, that was true. Nature Studies was insane, especially when it could discover itself. And when Guardian Animals was at its peak, Nature Studies was for sure one of the best cards in that deck. I think I would rescind that statement now, though. Even now, Primordial Studies is the reason Astromancer Solarian got nerfed, because you could generate Astromancers from the Primordial Studies, and that was such a powerful effect that they had to nerf the Prime version of Astromancer Solarian in another round of Mage nerfs. Even though you could whiff on this, there were some bad spell damage minions you could get, but on average you were getting something decent, either a Thalnos, a Lab Partner, or an Astromancer Solarian, all of which were insane, and yeah, Primordial Studies ended up being the best of the studies, in my mind, far and away the best, in Mage at least. It didn't see any play in Shaman, of course, but Tempo Mage really loved, like, Primordial Studies is one of the best cards in Tempo Mage, probably one of your best early players, a fantastic card by all respects.
Quite strong. It'll see play in Spell Damage Mage. Maybe it'll see play in Highlander Mage too, because it's good value.
It does see play in Highlander Mage.
I think so.
Well.
I think Highlander Mage is currently a bit tight on deck.
Sometimes it does run, Highlander Mages do run Primordial Studies if they're running the spell damage package. So if they run Cram Sessions, if they're running other spell damage payoffs, they run Primordial Studies. Not all variants of Highlander Mage run Primordial Studies, though, and Highlander Mage is a garbage deck.
Slots right now, and I don't think this will slot into that deck because of it. Next is Brain Freeze. It's a 1 mana rare spell, freeze a minion, and combos deal 3 damage to it. So in an ideal world, this is a 1 mana Frostbolt. Would that see play? Probably. Is it always going to be that? Not really. The important, I think, thing to note about this card is that the freeze effect is first, so the most important part of the card is on the face of it. But I think I don't see this card being run main deck. I don't think you use this card as a slot in your deck in Mage. It just doesn't really do enough to be a card you want to run, even in Highlander Mage. Especially with Ray of Frost still in the format. Like, Ray of Frost is just so much better than this that there's no real reason to run this in your deck. You would love to discover this off of, like, Magic Trick or other, like, lackeys maybe. But until that happens, I think you're probably not that happy with it. It's good, just not good enough to run on your deck.
Yeah, basically 100% correct. Brain Freeze is one of the best cards you can discover off your Magic Tricks or one of the best random spells you can get from your Invocation, etc., etc. But in terms of including cards in your deck, it was outclassed completely by Ray of Frost. Ray of Frost's so much better than Brain Freeze, as it was basically double the effect. You never played Brain Freeze for the damage. You played it for the freeze. It does see some main deck play in some combo decks. Mozaki Mage, for example, uses Brain Freeze as just another way to generate a spell damage on Mozaki. And potentially to stall the board if you don't have your Mozaki already. But I think that's the only deck that it's seen play in. But it is discovered quite often and is one of your good options from a Discover. But again, if you're building a deck, you never include Brain Freeze. You just play Rare Frost instead.
Next up is Potion of Illusion. It is a 4 mana epic spell. Add 1/1 copies of minions to your hand. They cost 1. This is just a combo card, I think. I mean, yeah, you can play it for value, but in Mage, what are you really hitting with this that gives you value? Like Kaligos, your Reno, your Zephrys, maybe. Sure, that's pretty greedy though, and it's a low tempo play, unless you're playing the 1/1 cost guys immediately. But you also probably need to play this alongside those guys, because people might play around things exactly like this, right? So, who knows? This is like a really specific card. It is great for combos, and I like that. I really do want to see a more combo pushed meta, and then subsequently have an anti-combo set of tools as well, so that we can have combo decks, but we can have ways to beat combo decks, and that will be nice. It does enable Exodia Mage to come back to standard. Do I think that'll be a competitive deck? No, not even a little bit. It seems like a gigantic meme, but who knows? Maybe it'll be good enough to see competitive play. Like, you need to play this alongside the minion you want to copy, and that might just be difficult to do.
So, a pretty big be careful what you wish for when it comes to Potion of Illusion. It did create a combo meta, much to my chagrin, but not in the way I would have liked. It created an uninteractable infinite loop with Tortolan Pilgrim, where you would just cast the Pilgrim over and over again, and it became super degenerate and really easy to do, and was infuriating and, like, irritable to play against. Basically, the change to Tortolan Pilgrim killed Total Mage, dubbed because of the Tortolan nature of the Pilgrim. But yeah, you basically made infinite copies of Tortolan Pilgrim with the Potion of Illusion, and that basically broke the game for a bit. It wasn't super crazy, and it didn't dominate the game from like a ladder perspective, but it was common enough and just that frustrating to play against that Blizzard took action and nerfed the card. Like, shocking to me though. I did not see Potion of Illusion being anything good at all. In terms of how valuable this card will actually be in the future, I think Potion of Illusion is actually going to be insane. I already like it in Highlander Mage lists, and with N'Zoth coming in the next expansion, which I think will fit into Highlander Mage the best, if you summon your Kaligos from your N'Zoth, you can Potion of Illusion your N'Zoth turn, which sounds insane. Potion of Illusion, definitely a card to keep an eye on, and I think is one that's going to be a hell of a lot of use in Mage going forward. It is greedy, but like hitting your Reno, hitting your Zephrys, hitting Kaligos, hitting your N'Zoth is so good with this card. Like, even if you just do it once, it's great. Like in Wild, I've been using Potion of Illusion with Luna's Pocket Galaxy Mage to hit my Reno Jacksons, because it gives me an extra heal, or I can hit, you know, a lot of different cards, and it's more versatile than, say, Zola the Gorgon, because the one cost of the minion does matter.
Next is Jandis Barov. She's a 5-mana legendary minion. She's a 2/1 with a battle cry that summons 2 random 5-cost minions and secretly pick one that dies when it takes damage. I was really excited about this card, but as we've seen so far from the set, there are a lot of really bad 5-drops. There's that Demon Hunter minion that's just a 1/1. This is a 2/1. There's a 0/3 egg in the 5-drop slot that's terrible. There's Starving Buzzard, which is a 3/2. There are a lot of really bad 5-drops, and while the expected value of this is probably quite high, there'll be chances where this just low rolls and is completely awful. Like, if you hit a Stranglethorn Tiger with Stealth and something like, and another big 5-cost card, you can just give the Stranglethorn Tiger the limitation or the weakness, and they probably can't remove it until they do a board clear or anything else. But I think the average expected value is pretty good. I think someone will need to do the math to really sort of show how good this actually is. It will need probably some extra analysis, but my initial thoughts are maybe Highlander Mage, but probably not. It seems a little bit just slow, and the high roll is probably not worth the middle ground play that you will get from this most of the time.
So I think doing the math would have really helped in an evaluation of Jandis Barov, but I can say with certainty that Jandis Barov is one of the strongest legendary cards in the set. She saw play in Tempo Mage, in Highlander Mage, in most forms of Rogue. It turns out that random 5-cost minions that, you know, give your opponent a minor puzzle are actually insanely good. The amount of stats you got off of Jandice for one turn was insane. So much so that some players would inefficiently throw board clears at her just because they didn't want to have to deal with the potential mindfuck that was Jandice Barov. And she also got buffed. So this expansion had a minor change to a card, which was a nerf to Nature Studies, where random and discover cards could no longer generate themselves, which was a good change. It was a nerf to Nature Studies, which I think was the main point of the change, but it also indirectly buffed Jandice Barov because she can't generate herself. So the worst roll you can get is the 0/3 egg or a 1/1 or 5 mana 1/1. But on average, Jandice creates enough stats on the board that is difficult for your opponent to choose that it ends up just being a fantastic card to include in your deck. And even if you do low roll one of your options, you just make that one the illusion, and you get to keep a random 5-drop with a 2/1 stat, and is still a minion that your opponent will potentially have to remove. Jandice Barov, absolutely fantastic card, and probably one of the best in the set. She was actually incredibly good.
Next up is Lab Partner. It's a common minion for 1 mana. It's a 1/3 with spell damage +1. That's really efficient, and also really good. Mage has a sort of spell damage matters theme going on in this expansion, and this will really help that deck. It's cheap, it's efficient, it's hard to remove, your opponents will need to respect it. Spell damage +1 is still really valuable, especially on a 1-cost minion. This follows up into things like Frostbolt, it follows up into Brain Freezes potentially, which will deal 4 damage, which makes it Eviscerate, which is really good. It goes into things like Raz Frost, turning that into 3 damage with a freeze instead. So I think this is just super efficient, and we'll probably see play in Spell Damage Mage. Maybe not in Highlander Mage. They're not that desperate for cheap plays on turn 1. They're not that worried about it or stressed. They tend to play more in the late game, and not... they don't need turn 1 plays necessarily, and I think that that's still true for this card. But I think it is good enough that it will see some play in some form of Spell Damage Mage, or maybe even some kind of Tempo Mage.
Lab Partner is like a super elegant design, and kind of like showcases just how badly some of the classic and basic set cards are. Spell damage is a keyword that is supremely underprinted and also extremely overcosted on most classic basic cards. And it's only as of Boomsday Project onwards that Blizzard have sort of been willing to print spell damage minions with efficient stats or at low mana costs, mostly out of fear of things like Malagos combos showing up without needing like a 9 mana minion. But no, Lab Partner, fantastic 1-drop, and probably one of the best in the game at the moment. Never really played on turn 1. It's a 1-drop that you don't always play on turn 1, especially in Tempo Mage, which I really love the elegance of the design of this card. Super flexible, super great card. Really, really push Mage over the edge.
Next up is Raz Frost Whisper. He is a 5-mana legendary minion. He's a 3/6, and at the end of your turn, you deal 1 damage to all enemies, improved by spell damage. So the immediate comparison to make with this card is the Despicable Dreadlord from Warlock, which was the 5-mana 4/5 that basically had the same effect. The difference, of course, with this is twofold. The first of which, well, there's actually several differences with this that make this compare much more favorably. The first of which is that this damages all enemies, start of all, so it can hit your opponent's face, which actually will matter in some matchups. You'll be able to go over the top and kill them with this. It is improved by spell damage, which will also come up a lot, and this is probably one of the best payoffs for running a spell damage mage in the set. This is just such a good effect. It also has a much better stat distribution. A 3/6 is much more powerful than a 4/5 because you want an effect like this to be harder to remove. At 6 health is much harder to remove than 5 health is. But this paired with pretty much any spell damage card means that it will cast a Consecration at the end of every turn if you have 1 spell damage minion with spell damage +1. If you have spell damage +2, it gets even better, and with even more than that, it becomes insane. And it can pair with the Mage Legendary and a heap of spells to just turn this into an absolute powerhouse, and I'm super, super excited to play Spell Damage Mage. I think this fits right into that and is probably like one of the defining cards in that deck. So Raz Frost was so hilariously enough did not see play in Tempo Mage right away. It took a few weeks of refinement in Tempo Mage before Raz started seeing play in lists, and which is really funny to me because everybody looked at this card and said, wow, that's a better Despicable Dreadlord. But nobody played him. He didn't see play in Tempo Mage until a few weeks after, and before it started to really pick up in popularity.
And Raz Frost Whisper, one of the best cards in that deck too, alongside Jandis Barov. Insane effect, especially if you can stack spell damage, which Mage could do because of Primordial Studies. Yeah, just an insane card. Great board clear, really, really, really potent Mage Legendary. One of the best in the set too, alongside Jandis Barov.
Here we go, speaking of, here's Muzaki the Master Duelist. She's a 5-mana legendary minion, she's a 3/8, and she has, after you cast a spell, gain spell damage +1. She has a great stat line, she's very sticky, she is at 5 mana, so she is a little slow, and you probably want to combo her at the same turn, so my ideal world for this card is you play it on the same, you play it when you have Frost Whisper already on the board, and then you have like a Sorcerer's Apprentice or something else, and then you just go ballistic with cheap spells, and you just amass spell damage, because it's every time you cast a spell you gain +1, and I think it will stack, so one spell is 1,
it does
you get
stack.
+2, 3, etc. It's probably not too hard to get this to spell damage +5 or +6 on the turn you play it, and that is a big clear with Raz Frost Whisper on the board.
So close.
I think it will see play in the spell damage mage deck. It might get cut now and then though, because it is slow, it's hard to play, and I do, maybe it's just not good enough in that list, but it is like a perfect piece for that, so who knows. It does have a really sticky stat line, even better than Raz Frost Whisper, like by quite a bit, but the effect is weak and it demands removal. There might be games where you just blow your opponents out with this, but at this stage I don't see that happening. But I do think it will see play in that spell damage mage deck, at least at first. It'll probably get cut later on because it's not that strong, or the whole deck will just fall apart because it just doesn't have the pieces to come together, and it won't necessarily be Mozaki's fault.
So I was actually 100% correct here. Muzaki did start out seeing some play in Tempo Mage, and also saw some play as her own deck as a defining part of Mozaki OTK Mage. She was cut from Tempo Mages and replaced with Raz, actually. She was run before Raz as part of Tempo Mozaki Mage. And then Mozaki Mages refined, those Tempo Mages refined down and they cut Mozaki. But they ended up being super strong. And Mozaki was still included as part of those lists. She is probably my favorite card in the set to use. She was so much fun to OTK people with, even if it was terrible. Mozaki OTK Mage is actually quite low win rate. But I can see it getting better in the future, bearing like a Sorcerer's Apprentice nerf or Hall of Fame. But yeah, one of the most fun cards in the set, even if she wasn't super powerful. But she did see some play in Tempo Mage to start with, but was quickly replaced.
Next up is Combustion. It's a 3-mana epic spell. Deal 4 damage to a minion. Any excess damages both neighbors. So from how I understand this card works is that if you kill a 2 health guy, the minions next to the 2 health minion will also take 2. It's not split. It's total. So if you deal 1 damage to a minion, the side minions will take 3 damage each. So you can do
Correct.
a total of 7 damage with this.
Correct.
It's good. It's really good. 3 mana deal 4 is really excellent in this metagame, especially considering there are a lot of 2 health minions around, and being able to spread that damage around is great. Mage was in dire need of an early control tool, and this is perfect for that deck, and I think it will go straight into Highlander Mage. They really needed this to beat things like Demon Hunter. It will kill annoying early Hunter minions as well, which is a hard matchup for them. It might come a little slow for those kind of decks, but it's still really valuable. So I expect to see this quite a bit in Highlander Mage. If Highlander Mage is still around, it's still like a high tier deck. I think it'll still be a deck, but whether or not it'll still be powerful is what remains to be seen. I also slotted it into the spell damage mage deck I have, because that deck, while it is more mid-range and tempo focused, you still need early removal. You can't just hope for the best. This also is really notably good with spell damage, right? Because the excess will also get the spell damage on top of the full normal damage. So this has a great multiplicative effect, and I really, really like the design of this card.
Combustion did see play in Highlander Mage, but Highlander Mage was not a great deck. It was probably tier 3 at best, if that. And it did not see play in Tempo Mage. It turns out they don't need this kind of board control. They had Firebrand, and they had Raz Frost Whisper, and just other spells, Ray of Frost. Sometimes they would discover other things through their Mana Cyclone combos that just made Combustion kind of obsolete to run in your main deck.
Mages really needed this. It is power creep on Shadowbolt, which is really funny. But yeah, I expect to see this. I actually think this will see quite a bit of play.
It does see quite a bit of play in Highlander Mage, but Highlander Mage is nowhere near as good as it was. It fell off hard this expansion. I expect to see a resurgence next expansion with the card pool being larger, but whether or not it will be powerful, it will take some time to figure out. But Combustion for sure will see play in that deck because they desperately needed it. Next is Devolving Missiles. It's a 1-mana epic spell that shoots 3 missiles at random enemy minions that transform them into ones that cost 1 less. This is going to be an extremely bad rating, I think. Polymorph sees play, and it's already really good. This, I think, is notably weaker than that. And also notably weaker than Devolve from Shaman. This does have some upside over Devolve in the fact that it can hit the same minion multiple times, but that's also equally a downside. If your opponent has 1 big minion, you can Devolving Missiles and devolve it by 3, which is probably quite a powerful effect. If your opponent has like 3 minions and you want to devolve all of them by 1, you might get unlucky and devolve their smallest minion twice, or 3 times even. And I think the random nature of that effect just means that this won't see play. You want an effect like this to be consistent. What made Devolve, what makes Hex, what makes Polymorph all such good effects is that they're consistent and you know what the outcome, for the most part, is going to be. Devolve kind of breaks that model a little bit, but Devolve is good enough as a transform effect. Even if you make your opponent's minions slightly better stat-wise, you're probably removing a death rattle or an onboard effect that you don't want to have happen. It also really hurts Resurrects.
So close.
All of this is technically true for Devolving Missiles, but it takes the consistency away from those effects, and that really weakens the card, where I think it probably won't see play. Sometimes there'll be some real big blowouts you can do with this because it'll hit just the right amount of things, but as it stands right now, in Mage, I don't see them running this card. It's just not good enough, and it does weaken their 1-cost spell pool a little bit, which maybe they needed. But it is still a playable card. If you get this randomly, it'll sometimes end up being really, really good for you, so... Again, don't take my criticism of this card as me completely trashing it. It's not awful. It's still quite good. I just don't think... It's kind of like Brain Freeze, where I don't see people running this as a card in their deck. So it turns out that we were in a meta that was really heavy on huge buffs. Paladin and Druid in particular buff their minions quite a lot, and some powerful death rattles, again, in both Paladin and Druid, which I think were probably the 2 most dominant decks you saw on the ladder. Even Face Hunter, to an extent, also was the same thing. So it turns out that Devolving Missiles was run in every single Mage, and probably the reason why Mage dominated Paladin so well. And guess what I didn't foresee is that you don't have to cast Devolving Missiles in a sense where it is going to be completely unpredictable. You have some element of control over, what it can hit based on the spells you have in your hand. Like, you're not playing this on 1. You're playing this at 5 or 6, where you might have, like, Ray of Frosts to kill smaller minions that you don't want to get devolved, and such. Devolving Missiles are so good that it's probably one of the better picks off of your 1-makers, your Cobalt Spellkins, off of your Magic Tricks and Evocations. Devolving Missiles was a fantastic card and saw so much play. Absolutely insane. Super good. And finally, we have One Thief, which is a Mage Rogue card. I haven't really been bringing up the dual class stuff too much because we're going to cover the cards in both classes anyway. It's a 1-mana common minion with a 1/2. It's a 1/2 that has a combo of Discover a Mage spell. I feel like this won't matter too much in Mage. I mean, a 1-mana 1/2 that gives you a spell is not all that special. This matters much more in Rogue, so we'll talk about it probably more when we get to Rogue. It's probably hard to combo this in Mage early as well, which sort of makes it more of an awkward fit. I think it's definitely much more of a Rogue card than it is a Mage card. That's all the Mage cards. One Thief was insane, and saw tons of play in Tempo Mage because discovering a Mage spell, even in Mage, is actually really good. Getting a 1/2 minion that gave you potentially an evocation, or gave you, whatever you needed for that situation. The flexibility of One Thief put it over the edge, and it was for sure one of the best cards in Tempo Mage. One of the best early draws you could make in that deck, for sure. Let's move on to Paladin.
Oh boy, Paladin.
A rare spell. Give a minion +8/+8. It can't attack heroes. Well, that's kind of nuts.
No shit.
Some people are going to look at this and they'll see the dino size. And they'll see dino size. Dino size didn't see play. Dino size was bad. Also, they'll look at Gorehowl. Not Gorehowl. Icehowl. Icehowl was bad. Icehowl didn't see play. It couldn't attack heroes. I think this is fantastic.
This card is busted. I don't know what I'm talking about with Dino Size here. Dino Size was 8 mana, make a minion +10%. This is 5 mana for 2 less stats. Oh, you can't attack heroes this turn. It doesn't matter.
if you don't pack removal for any minion on the board, this is insane. This is just like what made Divine Spirit in a Fire Combo Priest so unfun to play against, was this exact kind of thing, where any minion you leave on the board can become a threat. Even though it can't attack you in the face, it's still insane.
This is a 5 mana 8/8 buff. It allows you to take board control, and then you're not limited after that. You still have the 8/8 buff left to go face with.
Yeah, this is basically 8/8 with Rush for 5 mana. Would a 5 mana 8/8 with Rush she play? Are you fucking kidding me? Of course it would. I mean, okay, you have to have a minion on the board. This is a Paladin card.
This is a 5 mana 8/8 with Rush. Is that good? Yeah, it's really good. It's good to get off of Liadrin, although it might pollute your Liadrin pool a little bit because you want to be...
Interestingly enough, Liadrin actually is being cut because of Blessing of Authority, because it's actually better than her.
Hitting Librams of Hope and some Librams of Wisdom and Hand of Adal. Maybe as a one-of in Libram or Pure Paladin decks, but I do think it will see some play or some experimentation in those lists, because that is a lot of stats for 5 mana, and the downside won't matter that much if you're essentially going to be using it to trade anyway. This will suck in some instances where you need the buff for lethal and you can't do it. But I think in those cases, just run other things, right? Like, I feel like this is much better in a deck that cares more about board control and whatnot. And it fits really nicely in Paladin. I mean, that's a lot of stats for the cost. So.
They really just, like, hand-wrapped like Libram Paladin with like, hey, here's all of the things you're weak at, let's give you those weaknesses filled. Blessing of Authority was so good that it basically kicked Liadrin out of Pure Paladin and Libram Paladin, and you replaced her with Allura instead. So you would play Allura and hope to get Blessing of Authority and Allura on turn 4. That happens quite a bit.
Next is Judicious Junior. It's a 6 mana 4/9 common with Lifesteal. It's not that overwhelming. This is kind of just like an okay card. It was played in the reveal stream in Dual Paladin, which, I mean, okay, more Dual Paladin support, very funny.
Lol, big Paladin.
I don't think this will see play. It's just the stats are great, but it's not what Paladins need right now. It weakens a Paladin quite a little bit. It weakens their random card pool because this is going to be difficult to play. Although that is a decent stat line. 6 mana 4/9 with Lifesteal is like a pretty potent minion, right? It's kind of a pack filler. I feel, at least.
It is a pack filler.
Next up is...
I'm not really going to... It's a pack filler. Saw no play whatsoever.
Commencement. It's a rare spell for 7 mana. Summon a minion from your deck, give it Taunt and Divine Shield. Recruit effects are good. Call to Arms, saw play, gather your party.
Recruit effects are good, said the guy said me who thought Guardian Animals was going to be trash.
He did see some play, although not that much. Most recruit effects are quite powerful. Not all of them, but some of them.
Most.
The thing is how cost efficient they are. There was a card from Rastakan's Rumwolf called A New Challenger, which was a 6 mana spell that summoned a random 6-drop and gave it Taunt and Divine Shield. This is kind of like that, only the minion you're getting is already from your deck. Again, it fits in Dual Paladin, but Dual Paladin is kind of a meme.
Dual Paladin.
Don't know if that will be playable. This also is 7 mana. 7 mana is pretty slow. If you're going to cheat things out with this, they need to be 10 drops or really big things, and that just doesn't seem that great, even though you do get Taunt and Divine Shield on it. So you're getting a really big minion with a really good upside. Like, getting Colossus of the Moon with this is pretty good because it gives it Taunt, it forces your opponent to react to it, but you're waiting to turn 7 and they can probably just remove the minion that you summon with this. I don't see it. It is a huge power creep on Gather Your Party in Warrior, but I still don't think this will see play. I don't think Big Paladin will be a deck, and I don't think it'll see play in Highlander list because of the deck building restriction you're placing on yourself if you want to consistently get maximum use out of this card.
Well, Dual Paladin, I think, did need more recruit effects to make it better. Commencement is not a good recruit effect. Dual is much better because it comes down 2 turns earlier. Paladin also missing a lot of essential big minions to make a deck like that work. Like, yeah, they have Tyrallion, they have Tyrion, they have the Colossus of the Moon, but this is much more of a warrior card than a Paladin card, for sure.
Next is Wave of Apathy. It's a 1 mana common spell. Set the attack of all enemy minions to 1 until your next turn. Paladin already has effects like this, and typically they don't see play. The only one that I think I've ever liked in Paladin is Subdue, but that's only because Subdue where it turns the minion into a 1/1, which makes it much easier to remove. Just lowering your attack probably gives you better trades in Paladin. But in saying that, I feel like maybe this just isn't worth a slot in your deck. It's a good discover, but I don't think you'll play this main deck as a tech card. I don't think you'll need it, even against aggro. I think just run Subdue instead.
Yeah, basically, if you need a tool like Wave of Apathy in your deck, just run Subdue instead. But you don't need either of those because Pure Paladin is insanely strong. They were so good they didn't need Wave of Apathy. They had enough defensive tools in their mid-range deck.
Next is Shield of Honor. Mana.
Shield of Honor, for example, this is just a warrior card. This saw no play in Paladin whatsoever, because how do you activate this in Paladin?
Common spell, give a damage minion +3 attack and Divine Shield. Wow, that is a really good effect, and boy can Paladin not really make much use of it. Getting damage minions in Paladin is going to be really difficult, because the only real way you can damage your minions in Paladin is through combat. You don't have self-damaging spells most of the time, and you're not running things like Mad Bombers to activate effects like this. Though admittedly this is a really strong effect, but I think it is much more of a warrior card, and I think I'm going to extrapolate more on that when we get to it in warrior.
So yeah, Shield of Honor, there is technically a way to activate this. You could pen flinger your own minions in in Libram Paladin to activate Shield of Honor, but that sucks. Just use pen flinger to like crush your opponent's spirits, because that's what it's good at.
Next is Lord Barov, which is a 3-mana 3/2 legendary minion. Set the health of all other minions to 1, and Death Rattlers deal 1 damage to all minions. Wowie, that's a great effect. I also don't see it that well in Paladin. Paladin doesn't really need this kind of effect. They already have things like Libram of Justice paired with Consecration, and that's already good enough for them most of the time. They will probably still use this in Pure Paladin, I think, though, because you want a critical mass of things like this. This is a great board clear, and it's not too hard to set up. And you don't even need the Death Rattle necessarily to go off for this to be great. If I'm being honest with you, you can just play this and then take favorable trades, because it will work that way. I still think Libram of Justice will typically be better for you, but maybe they'll run this. Again, it's the same story. I think this is much better as a warrior card, but it is still a definitely playable Paladin card, and might see some play in Highlander Paladin if that deck pops up, but who knows.
Lord Barov actually did not see play in Libram and Pure Paladin for the longest time, but now it does. It turns out that being super efficient at clearing the board in Pen Flinger Libram Paladin is good, and using your Pen Flinger to clear minions with using Lord Barov, with Lord Barov, is really good. They run this alongside Justice, and I think sometimes they even cut Consecration. But yeah, Lord Barov actually saw a fair bit of play in Paladin. Paladins are so good at clearing the board right now. It's ridiculous. And Lord Barov and Libram of Justice are huge problem cards in Paladin because of it. I don't think Barov is the main cause of it. I think Libram of Justice is much more of a problem card. But Paladins are way too efficient at clearing big boards right now, and that's usually one of their major weaknesses. Like, Equality was nerfed because of it. And they've just printed a better one.
High Abbess Allura is a 4-mana 3/6 legendary minion with Spell Burst. Cast a spell from your deck, targets this if possible. This is actually a really, really potent card, especially in Paladin, which is kind of... It's a shame for me personally, because I am probably not going to be playing much Paladin this expansion, because I want to get my hero powers in Golden, so I'll be playing Priest more. So I'm really still excited to play this card, and I'm glad that dual cost cards are a thing. But this is a very good Paladin card. It fits right into Libram Paladin. You can just play like a Libram of Wisdom on this, and you get a Libram of Hope off of it. It does cast the spell from your deck. It's not a copy, so that will matter. Paladin doesn't typically run too much that will be detrimental to this. Probably the worst thing you can have off of it is like a Consecration or a Libram of Justice. But even then, that's not that bad. This is still a really good fit in Libram Paladin. There's a lot of good buffs in that deck, and if any of them lands on Abbess Allura, you're probably fine. I think this will see some play in Libram Paladin because it slots right into that deck, and I think it's pretty fantastic in that deck as well.
Yep, turns out Allura is completely fantastic in Libram Paladin. Blessing of Authority is insane if you high roll it onto Allura. But yeah, even if you just get like a first day of school, you know, it's a low roll, but you know, it's something you can get, and it's not that bad. I think the worst thing you can get from this is a Libram of Justice, and even that you get a 1/4 weapon, and if your opponent has any minions, you basically clear them. Yeah, there's no downside to running Allura and Paladin. She is absolutely insane in that deck. Absolutely insane.
This is the kind of card you can just build your deck around too, but I feel like that's not the case with Paladin. It already has a good archetype that it fits into.
You don't
need to run anything specific to make this good. I think you just run it. Anyway.
Allura was good with that, and he
next is Argent Braggart. It's a 2-mana epic minion. It's a 1/1 with a battle cry to gain attack and health equal to match the highest on the battlefield. So what that means is that if there's an 8/1 and a 5/8 on the board, it will become a 2-mana 8/8. This is really pushed for Paladin.
A 2-mana 8/8, by the way, is not that crazy of an option for Argent Braggart. Just putting that out there.
They definitely felt the concerns of Paladin's power level, and this is sort of like a direct response to that. It is a really powerful card, but the weakness, I think, comes in the fact that it is reactive. You can't really play this proactively. But it does take from both sides of the board, so maybe you can play this with some proactive sort of nature. This will just become like probably the best minion on the battlefield when you play it, and it's only 2 mana. Sometimes you'll whiff, and sometimes this will just suck in the late game, and it'll be just bad. But I think like most of the time it'll be good enough that you're just happy to play it, and it's just strong. Works well with Paladin as well because of like buffed minions exist. You also have Librams of Hope, which are fairly cheap, and you can just play this alongside like a 3 or 4 mana Libram of Hope and get 2 8/8s on the board for 5 mana, which is like really, really, really insane. Again, this card is so pushed for Paladin that I'm a little bit concerned about it, and I think it will see some play in pure Paladin lists and maybe just some more mid-range Paladin decks. I don't think it works in aggro though because of the reactive nature of the card, and sometimes it will whiff, and sometimes you're not going to hit this in the right way you want. But this is still fine as like a 3/3, you know what I mean? Like a 2-mana 3/3 is still a really good play.
Oh no.
Next is Devout.
So I want to talk a lot about Argent Braggart because that card is fucking insane. So let's talk about it real quick. Why does this card cost 2 mana? This is in a class where you can play Libram of Hope, which is an 8/8 for usually really cheap. I don't understand how Argent Braggart was not on many people's top 10 lists as one of the best cards in the set. It's probably top 5, one of the most powerful cards in the set, especially in Paladin. Like you play this alongside a Blessing of Authority, you have 2 8/8 buffs basically, or better, because the Braggart will match stats. So if you have something that's already quite big and you Authority it and then play Braggart alongside it, like this is for sure the most pushed card in the set. I'm shocked this hasn't been nerfed or was on many people's top 10 lists. It was insane. It is just crazy, and it's so like ridiculous. Argent Braggart, you know, this is a 2 mana card. It should be at least 3, maybe even 4 mana, in my opinion. It's ridiculous.
I don't think it works in aggro though. B3 is still a really good play.
Like, as I said, like it's good as a 3/3, and it will often be like a 5/8.
Next is Devout Pupil, which is a 6 mana epic minion. It's a 4/5 with Divine Shield and Taunt, and it costs 1 less for each spell you've cast on friendly characters this game. Wow, that's good. Paladin has Librams already. You're constantly casting spells on your minions in Paladin. You have Hand of Dolls, you have Librams of Wisdom. Sometimes you'll cast Librams of Hope to heal your minions. There's also new spells in this expansion that you'll be using that you'll be casting on your minions to get this discounted. And I think it won't take very long for this to just cost 0, and it'll be a 0 mana Sunwalker, which is nuts. Pure Paladin loves this card. They really, really like sort of anti-aggro tools, and this will often be an anti-aggro tool. The only thing I'm concerned about with this is that you will have to cast a lot of spells on your own minions, and you don't want to be oversaturating yourself with Librams of Wisdom. You don't want to be casting them too much so that your Liadrin is saturated with them, and all you get back is Librams of Wisdom. But that might just be fine because you're able to play 0 mana 4/5s with Divine Shield and Taunt, which is really, really good. Fits right into current Libram Paladin and pure Paladin lists. You don't even have to play this for 0 mana. This is insane at 4.
So if you cast 2 spells on friendly minions, which is really easy to do in Paladin, you can just get a Yeti with Divine Shield and Taunt. That's crazy. Guess what? It's usually way cheaper than that. This card is also absurd. Priest wishes they could use something this good. My god. All of these Priest Paladin cards, like Allura and Devout Pupil, Priest wishes that it could play these cards as efficiently as Paladin does. It's crazy. Next is Gift of Luminance. It's a 3-mana rare spell. Give a minion Divine Shield and summon a 1/1 copy of it. I don't think there's too many shenanigans you can pull with this card. And as I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of cards that make copies of other cards. But this isn't too bad. It's not too expensive. It's fine with the Abyss because it will summon a 1/1 copy of the Abyss that will also, you know... So you cast this, the Abyss will use a spell on herself, which could be a buff in Paladin, and then she'll summon a 1/1 copy of the Abyss, which can also have a spell burst, which is nice, because the spell burst doesn't trigger until after the spell resolves. So this will resolve, the spell itself will resolve, there'll be a 1/1 copy of the Abyss, and the original Abyss will cast another spell on herself, which is really nice. It is 3 mana for just Divine Shield and a 1/1 copy of a minion, so maybe it's not that strong, but giving Divine Shield to a minion is pretty good. You can also use this on your opponent's minions and steal a 1/1 copy of your opponent minions, so like a Kael'thas, for example, if you want that, which we saw in the reveal stream. True. But I feel like most of the time you're going to want to be giving your own minion a Divine Shield and summoning a 1/1 copy of that. This is also really good with Librams in general, because you can put like Librams of Wisdom on your minion, then give it Divine Shield and summon a copy of your minion also with Librams of Wisdom. But again, as I said, you don't want too many Librams of Wisdom in your spell pool because it'll pollute your Lady Liadrin later. I like how I keep mentioning like the polluting of Lady Liadrin, like that was going to be irrelevant at all. They don't even run Lady Liadrin. Just a point of reference, I'm not going to say too much about Gift of Luminance, it's so basically no play. But compare Gift of Luminance to the Argent Braggart we just saw. Just as a point of comparison, right? This is 3 mana, you get a Divine Shield and then a 1/1 with Divine Shield that's a copy of the minion. So you want to be hitting specific abilities with this, stuff like that. Argent Braggart is 1 mana less, and you don't get a 1/1, you just get another copy of the best stats on the board, right? It's unreal. Next is Turalyon the Tenured. He is an 8 mana legendary minion. He's a 3/12 with Rush, and whenever it attacks a minion, set the defender's attack and health to 3. So essentially this is a 3/9 for 8 that kills a minion. That's still pretty good. People are really just trash talking this card and saying how bad it is. I think it's actually quite good and will slot into some pure Paladin lists because it's good removal. Paladin really suffers right now at killing big minions, especially evasive minions, in cards like in classes like against Hunter, for example, and this will be able to clear those quite well, or the 7/7 Dragon. But I think I also see where people are coming from. This is not like an amazing or game-breaking effect. It's just an efficient minion that's pretty good at what it does. It doesn't silence them, so death rattles will still go off, but it really does help Paladin with the weakness they're currently having right now in some pure lists where it's difficult to kill big, evasive minions because your minions just don't make it through and can't push past to get to lethals or whatnot, and this will sort of help you in that instance. You can also buff this as well, and it will not really be relevant except for buffing the health. Maybe if you can heal this in Paladin somehow with like a Libram of Hope, you can get heaps of value out of it. And again, your opponent will probably want to try and kill this because this will basically remove many of your minions for free. But most of the time, this will kill one minion, and you're not going to feel that great about it. It turns out that Turalyon was just too fair. Paladin had so much other stuff that was just so much better than Turalyon. Like, I'm talking about how, like, oh, it's really hard to kill invasive minions. Like, Paladin really struggles with that. But then we also got Blessing of Authority. It was the first card we looked at. And it just gives a minion +8/+8, which means it will, even a 1/1 Silverhand Recruit, will just completely swallow a 7/7 with evasive. Turalyon, much too fair. I think the card is great. I think Turalyon wishes it was Sunkeeper Tarim, of course. But Turalyon is still a fantastic card. It's just too fair. Paladin was doing stuff that was way more busted than killing a minion for 8 mana and killing any minion for 8 mana. Really interesting flavor, though, for Paladin removal. Also, yeah, you still had Justice and you had so many other better ways to remove things in Paladin than Turalian.
Next up is Ceremonial Maul. It's a 3-mana epic weapon for Paladin and Warrior. It's a 2/2, 2 attack, 2 durability, and it has a spell burst to summon a student with taunt and costs equal to the spell's cost. I think this won't take the default cost, it'll take the amount you paid, so Libram of Hope is not as good with this. It might be okay.
Which was relevant.
In Paladin, I feel like you don't run that many big spells to make this work. Maybe this will see play in some kind of Highlander Paladin because they just want the value, but I don't see this running in pure lists or any sort of mid-rangey lists in Paladin. I don't think this will fit into current Paladin archetypes. Or Warrior archetypes, if I'm being honest. This doesn't seem that strong. There just isn't big spells in the format that you want to really be getting off of this. Admittedly, if you cast like a 4-cost spell or a 5-cost spell, it's pretty good, but who knows. Admittedly, spell bursts on weapons also are quite good because weapons are quite hard to remove. Unless we're in a meta where we see lots of oozes, the spell bursts on weapons will probably activate quite a bit because weapons are difficult to remove. And therefore you'll be able to activate the spell bursts on them with some consistency, so you'll be able to play this on turn 3 and wait, and then play a spell that you want later.
So I was actually kind of right on the money. That we were in an ooze meta, but it didn't matter because Ceremonial Maul saw absolutely zero play whatsoever.
Next up, we have the First Day of School. It's a 0-mana spell, it's a common, and it says add 2 random 1-cost minions to your hand. This is probably another big weakness for Paladin decks right now that's just been covered. Pure Paladin only had access to 2 playable 1-drops right now, because Brazen Zealot is awful in that deck. You had the Eldor Attendant, and you had the Murloc, the imprisoned Sun Girl. This probably just replaces Sun Girl in Pure Paladin straight up. Giving 2 random 1-cost minions on turn 1 is really good. It's also a Paladin card, so you can get random neutral 1-costs that are actually really good for you in the early game. It's 0 cost, so it will activate spell bursts as well if you want to do that for basically nothing, and you also get 2 1-cost minions. I guess you can make the argument that, why run this card to get 2 random 1-costs when you could just run the 1-cost minions you want in your deck anyway? And I guess the answer is because a lot of 1-cost minions you want in your deck anyway are not Paladin cards, they're neutral cards, and you want the Pure Paladin synergy cards in your deck to start with. And this helps you keep your Pure Paladin synergy and allows you to have some 1-drop plays in your deck without crippling yourself totally. As well as, of course, the aforementioned spellburst triggers.
Yeah, First Day of School is insane. It helps you trigger your Allure early, and it gives you access to basically any 1-drop, which is better than anything you had access to in Paladin already. Like, gone are the days of running a Dormant Murloc because you wanted an early game minion. Instead, you just run a 0-cost spell that gives you potentially like the best 1-drops you can get.
And then finally we have Goody 2 Shields. It's a 3-mana rare minion. It's a 4/2 with Divine Shield and Spellburst gain Divine Shield. Wow, this is nuts. There's a 3-mana 3/1 Divine Shield minion. Saw competitive play, right? It was a competitive card. This is that. It has +1/+1 mana, and later in the game it can just get a Divine Shield again. This is really good on turn 4, right? If you just trade this into a minion and get rid of the Divine Shield, and then just re-give it Divine Shield immediately.
Yep.
That's still really good value because it basically killed a minion. It's almost better than Turalion in that point because it was a lot cheaper and a lot easier to do, especially since Paladin has First Day of School available as a card.
And Libram's
again, this card is really pushed. Paladin's got a lot of high power level stuff this expansion, probably because of the current sort of feeling amongst the player base that Paladin is quite weak. And the same kind of Shaman as well, actually, when we get to that. But this does feel quite good. And yeah, it's just a powerful card. I think it will see a fair bit of play in Pure Paladin lists and Libram Paladins, but what do they cut for this in my mind? It will also see play in aggro. Like if aggro Paladin ever rises up, or Murloc, maybe even Murloc Paladin will run this. I don't think so. I think they're at a critical mass right now, and there are new Murlocs in the set, so I think it's fine. It's a really, really pushed minion. Like this is well statted and it has a good effect. I would be shocked if it doesn't see play, but at the same time, maybe it just doesn't have a home right now, or it just slots right into Pure Paladin right now. It's a good buff target. Actually, is it a good buff target? Because you have the spell burst. You don't want to activate that too early, huh?
Turns out that didn't matter at all.
Maybe this is more awkward than I'm thinking it is, but it is
really
pushed and really effective. Maybe we would just see playing Pure Paladin as a good 3-drop.
I'm kind of surprised because this is probably the best 3-drop ever printed. It's absurd. If you don't kill Goody 2 Shields, you lose games. It's insane how strong this card is. Because if it sticks, it can trade, and then a single spell gives it back Divine Shield, and then eventually it'll get, authorityed, and then it becomes impossible to kill. Yeah, it's the best 3-drop in the game, and Paladin was not that weak going into this expansion. Everyone seemed to think that Paladin was super, super weak. Trust me, as someone who played exclusively Paladin for the entire previous expansion, after like the 3rd or 4th round of Demon Hunter nerfs, Paladin was not weak anymore. Demon Hunters started to go away, they started to beat Demon Hunters that were still around, and they were starting to pick up pace, and they were actually really, really strong. Paladin was not weak at the end of the last expansion, but everyone seemed to think it was, or at least Blizzard seemed to think it was, and all of the Paladin cards, like so many Paladin cards are so pushed power level wise, they're insane. And it shows. Like, looking back at this now, my god, Pure Paladin got gifted all these amazing things. And Pure Paladin isn't even the best Paladin deck anymore. They actually run neutral cards now because the Pure Paladin stuff isn't good enough. They instead run neutrals that are better.
Alright, next is Priest.